Not too long ago, I was looking for some answers on some things and was kind of frustrated because I, expected these revelations to come to me, to be guided in the right direction, and I was not feeling it. I was frustrated about it, and I remembered this talk that I gave several years ago in a title that talk, Listening Mistakes with God. And I have used these listening mistakes in several of my corporate communications classes and individual communication classes, and thought it's time to bring them back out because I needed to be reminded of what was going on. And I remembered when I was first putting this together that my plan had been to put together a talk about prayer. And that's a pretty important talk, to let people know ways to pray. And as I'm putting together this talk on prayer, these thoughts about these listening mistakes kept pounding on me. And I was like, just go away, And I kept trying to push them aside. And I'd get back to work, and they'd hit me again. I'd get back to work, and they'd hit me again. It just kept on and on and on. And finally, I realized what I was doing. I was practicing listening mistakes with God. I'm like, holy cow. I wasn't listening. So I finally surrendered and decided I'll do that talk later on, and I started focusing on this one. Now, before we get into the different listening mistakes that we make with people, but especially with God. With people, it's a little more noticeable because we're doing it kind of out loud or physically. With God, it's a little harder to detect because everything is internal for the most part. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. But it occurred to me that communication with God was lacking in that instance when I was not receiving the information or that I thought I should get or in the ways I should get. And it became very, very clear to me that communication mistakes they're one-sided. God puts it out there. The answers we need are there. Whether you believe in this divine knowledge or you believe in a God who sends you messages or the one mind, the answers are there. If we're not getting them, it ain't because they're not there. It's not because God is messing up. It's all back on us. And I hate to say that because it really irritates me that the more I learn about personal growth, the more I learn about spiritual growth, the more I learn about me expanding my understanding, my knowing, the more I understand it's all me when I mess up. It's fun to blame others, but when the reality hits, it's all back on us. So it's not with God, it's with us. Let me clarify what a mistake is before we go further. A lot of people look at a mistake as a horrible thing. Some people see mistakes as done, that's it, it's over. Wrong. A mistake is exactly what it says, a mistake. Think about a Hollywood movie. When they're filming and they get in the middle of this great scene and somebody messes up, they yell cut. They have a do-over. How many times in life have you thought, that's it, done, no good, when in reality you could have had a do-over? In every situation of your life, there's an opportunity for a do-over. Now hear me out here. You may have found some situations where physically you did something, that was it. You couldn't go back and redo it. There may have been some situations where something came out of your mouth that hurt somebody else's feeling. It's hard to take that back. The do-over in those instances, and in every instance, is that you can do over your experience of it. And when you do that, you learn, you grow, you expand. If I say something that really hurts somebody, I may not be able to take that hurt away from them. I can do things to try to make up for it. I can apologize. I can try to mend fences, but the hurt is there until they decide to do something. But I can relive my experience of that, which will help me learn a different way. So you always have a do-over. It's taking the time to make that do-over happen that we usually just, no, it's done, I got to keep going. So take your do-overs. So understand that these things I'm about to list are simply mistakes. Have a do-over when you catch yourself in them. So the first communication mistake with God is tuning out. This is kind of what I was doing when I was trying to write this thing about prayer, and this talk about listening mistakes kept coming in, and I kept going, nah. I would tune it out and try to get back on focus. We tune out when something comes in that we really don't want to hear, that we're more interested in this over here. If we stop and we listen and we allow ourselves to hear, to receive, sometimes it comes in the form of a feeling, to feel. We may find that if we just adjust our course a little bit, we're right where we want to be. But we tune out. The next one is daydreaming. We do this all the time. We could be right in the middle of a great conversation with somebody and we're thinking about sitting on a beach in Florida when the hurricane's not coming, or sitting on a beach in Hawaii, or sitting up in the mountains overlooking a big valley, a waterfall, and this conversation is just going 100 miles an hour towards us, and we're daydreaming about what's happening out here. Have you ever done that and then embarrassed yourself by responding in a way that's totally inappropriate, totally not involved with the conversation at all? I think we can all say, yeah. Tune in. Stop the daydreaming. We do that with God. We do that. Have you ever had a prayer and you say amen and then you're immediately thinking about what's next in your day? Daydreaming about what's coming up. How likely are you to hear answers? Not very. So daydreaming. The next one I do quite a bit. I do this with Kathy. I do this with people that, friends. I do this with God. Is denying content. When we actually hear the message from God and then deny that it's even possible for God, who am I for God to talk to? Who am I to think that that answer is what I deserve because that answer is just too good? We deny the content that comes back to us. We deny ourselves. We cheat ourselves out of believing that that truly is for us. The other one is chatterbox. Now this is one that a lot of people think that they're praying, but they're really just blocking answers. It's when we get into that prayer and we just, it's like a machine gun asking questions or talking to God, nonstop talking. Never giving a break to hear anything. We have a good friend that can ask 15 questions that are totally unrelated to each other, and not once is there a second in between questions to answer. If I'm not taking notes, I can't answer them. Okay, let's say the first thing he asked me was this, and the second thing he asked me was this, but that was like 30 minutes ago, so how do I know if I'm getting them right? You constantly asking or talking to God, even suggesting ways that you can answer my prayer this way. Constantly talking, never slowing down. And it may not be out loud, it could be all mental. Every one of these can and will, they are mental, but some of them express in the physical as well. The next one is counterattacking, which is a listening mistake that is used when we hear a message that we don't want to hear. God, what do I need to do to make this happen? And we get this answer, we go, oh, no, that's not good. I don't like that. No. No, how about this? How about this instead? What if I do this? And if this over here, would that be okay? Counterattacking. The next one is evaluating and judging. And we kind of have to do that before we can counterattack. But evaluating judges is taking the message. We hear the message from God, and then we got, is that really the answer? Was that just my imagination? No, that was God. Is that the right answer for me? Well, now in this situation, maybe I need to do this over here because that right there doesn't look like it's going to fit. We evaluate, we judge, and I could probably add correct on there because we tend to correct God often. Yeah, you must have been thinking of somebody else. That's not for me. This leads us into overanalyzing. Overanalyzing. Whether you think the idea is a good idea or a bad idea, we start thinking about it and we start really digging into it. This leads to paralysis by analysis. We get so caught up in trying to figure it all out, to make sense of it, to dissect it, so that we understand every bit of it, that we don't do a thing. Paralysis by analysis. Overanalyze. No, this one, I don't know if my brother actually did this with God. He probably did. He did it with everybody else, and that's why this reminds me of that. Wheeling and dealing. Oh, God, if you let this happen, I'm going to do this. If you let me do it this way, I'm going to do this. I'll go to church more often if I get this. It's wheeling and dealing, trying to make a deal, trying to work things out, manipulate things so that they work out in your favor. The problem with that is that we forget that whatever God has put in front of us, whether it be, and again, if we can go back to, if we think God is sitting on a cloud somewhere granting wishes and prayers, if that's where you start, go for it. If you think God is omnipresent, in everything, everywhere present, and that the ideas of God, the mind of God is also everywhere present, just waiting on us to open up to it, that's fine. Whatever you believe, wheeling and dealing is all about trying to manipulate it to fit our needs. And we know that whatever is laid out there for us is perfect when we allow it, when we open up to it, when we receive it. But we often forget, and we get into our human brain and we think that our way has got to be better because we're living this life and so we know best. The next one is defending. I probably do this one more than any of the rest. I get an idea in my head of what it should be. And then any idea that comes to me, whether it's in a conversation with Kathy or with one of y'all, or with God, with somebody else, I'm going to defend my position. And I've gotten pretty good about doing it in such a way it doesn't feel so much like I'm defending. But that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to defend my position and sway you into believing it. Believing that it's best. The good news about it is the more you pay attention to these, the more you realize you're doing them, so you don't do them so much. But that's the one I fall into the most. Like, Kathy, I think we ought to do this. No, Kenny, we don't need to be doing that. Well, but wait a minute. Now, if we do this, and I present my case. It's like being in a court. Not because she's a judge, it's because I feel like I have to defend my case. And most times she's smarter than me, so I try to listen. But so defending, we do that with God. We say our prayer. We have an idea of what we want that answer to that prayer to be. And if something comes down that's not directly in line with it, we go to defending our position. The next one is probably the most common listening mistake with God. Busyness. Busyness comes in many different forms. We can legitimately be busy in our work, in our day-to-day chores that we need to get done. We let those get in the way of conversation with God. Sometimes that TV is creating busyness. Well, I'm going to watch this show. Well, the next season, the next episode is coming up. I can watch that. We get busy watching TV. We get busy on our computers, our tablets, our phones. We let busyness keep us from communicating fully with God, from listening to God. And it truly does become a listening mistake, not only with God, but with others and ourselves. Every one of these things that I've talked about so far is we do with ourselves as well. Even if you're just trying to find out what your essence is telling you, as opposed to your ego, we use these things and they get in the way. Busyness keeps us from hearing and experiencing God. It creates this invisible wall between us and God. Busyness, as I said, comes in many forms. A lot of times it's just in your mental chatter. For me, that's a big one. And I invite you to take a minute later on. Just take a few minutes and just tune into your mind. How fast is it running? Mine breaks speed records every day. It is going so fast until I stop. I remember. I tune in. And I bet yours probably does it as well. The world is so crazy. There's so many distractions, so many things stimulating our mind to think on this worldly level that it's non-stop thoughts. I've talked about it before. There was a study that said that each one of us has between 60 and 80,000 thoughts per day. We only tune into 8 to 10,000 of them. And of those, we're not really tuned in enough to put into words, but we know that something's going on. I would say that the way the world stimulates us these days, there's probably more thoughts than that we're not tuned into. The problem with this is those thoughts all create an experience. They all create an energy within us, a feeling. And those feelings create the experience that we have on the physical level. So these thoughts that we're not tuned into are affecting our moods. They're affecting our happiness, our love. When we stop and we tune in, when we stop using these listening mistakes with ourselves and with God, we can better tune into what's going on within us. One of the ways to do that, one of the greatest models for communications that I have ever heard and that I have taught ever since I learned it, it's called the LOVE model. LOVE stands for listen openly, validate equally. So whether you're dealing with God, yourself, or someone else, this model works beautifully. Listening openly is simply quieting your mind, being present, and just hearing what's going on. With other people, that's easy to do when you remember to do it, because you've got something physical to tune into. With God, it's a spiritual, mental experience. But again, you kind of think of God as being right out here, that even though God is inside, you kind of think of that communication coming from right here. With ourselves, it's a little more difficult because we don't have something to tune into out there so much. But it's listen openly. It's quieting your mind, hearing what's there. It's hearing the message without judgment. This is key. Without judgment, without commentary, which is hard for some of us. We hear somebody, and even if we hear them perfectly, we like to have a comment about it. Sometimes that comment is more damaging, even if it's an empowering comment. Sometimes it's more damaging than being silent. nodding your head and letting them know, making eye contact, letting that person know you heard them. And obviously without these listening mistakes. It is forgiving yourself for the listening mistakes and hearing the message again in its purest form. So go back. If you do make a mistake, forgive yourself and listen again. Hear what's really being said. The validating equally part is validating that you heard the message, received it, and accepted it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. If Kathy were having a problem that I didn't understand, and she gave it all to me, and I still didn't agree with how she was feeling, it doesn't take away what she's feeling. It doesn't take away her experience, so I can accept that she's having that experience. I don't have to accept it and feel the same thing. In fact, if I do that, it's probably going to weaken both of our ability to deal with the situation. So using the love model, like any new behavior, is going to take some practice. But I invite you to do it. Just create sacred space before every conversation. And it can be very, very quickly. As you're walking up to someone, just take a breath. Center yourself. Commit to using the love model. Listen openly, validate equally. And then hear what's being said. Do not interpret it in any words other than what they use. And then the second tool, besides the love model, is do you mean? And you can do this with yourself, you can do this with especially with other people, and you can do this with God. After you hear the message, do you mean, and you repeat it back in your own words. If you're doing it with yourself and you repeat it back in different words, it's either going to resonate or not. If it doesn't resonate, you didn't get it. Do it again. With God, same thing. It's either going to resonate or it won't. If it doesn't, do it again until it resonates. And with somebody else, it gives them permission to say, yes, that's exactly how I feel, or no, it's more like this. Either way, you have let yourself, God, and the other person know, I'm present, I'm listening, I want to hear, I want to understand. So practice the love model, practice the do you means, and know that the listening mistakes are just that, mistakes. They're not the end of the world. Let's pray. Father God, I know divine love guides my way. Every person in this room can know that truth. We turn within, we breathe, we open our hearts to the healing power of love. Fully immersed in this love, we bask in the stillness. We allow the light of love to heal whatever needs to be healed, to correct whatever needs to be correct, to fully empower us in all our days. As we relax more deeply into this inner sanctuary, this truth, we feel God's presence, reminding us that we are never alone, reminding us that we can fully connect, that divine mind is within us all, so understanding is there. Divine love guides us in all of our affairs, so the guidance is always there. The understanding is always there. We surround our loved ones in this healing light, knowing that in this healing light we can find that true communication with God, with ourselves, with others. In the presence of divine love, we know that all is well. We are one with all creation. Love heals us, protects us, opens us. Understanding, communication is ours. And so it is. Amen.